All right, there we go. Hello everyone, how's it going? Team here, and this is BxJS Weekly, episode 129, bringing you all the best JavaScript news of the week in a podcast form. And hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Hi James, hi Emmanuel, hi Nitsan, hi, I have no idea how to read your username, so I'm just, Araplay? I guess. You know what, we'll stop on that. If you can fix that, just let me know. I will read it correctly from now on. But welcome, guys. Welcome to the stream. It's been a couple of weeks since we did one of those because it was incredibly hot here. But, you know, as I said during the last dev stream, it's finally back to, well, normal-ish situation, I guess. So we are back with some JavaScript news. And do we have some really cool stuff today? As usual, the first section of the week is getting started. And do we have some really cool articles here today? First one is Temporal, date and time in JavaScript today. Now, we already talked about the Temporal proposal for JavaScript quite some time ago, actually. I think it was like last year or something, if I remember correctly. And the idea behind this Temporal proposal, which is now stage 2, if I remember correctly, yep, is to essentially replace tools like Moments, DataFans, Stage.js, and all the others with the core stdlib APIs, right? And this article essentially walks you through the Temporal API as a tutorial, comparing it to Moment.js and DateFunds, and shows you how you can use Temporal API right now. Obviously, you know, through the polyfill, or if you want to enable it via flags, I believe it's already shipped in some browsers. And yeah, it's a very nice API. So if you're working with dates and you were curious about Temporal Date Time API and you wanted a sort of a nice introduction, do absolutely check this out. It is actually pretty damn good. Right, continuing, we got a really big write-up from Dr. Axel Rauschmeier titled Minimal React, Getting Started with the Front-End Library. Now, this is overall just a tutorial for React. What's cool about it is, well, first of all, it's sort of very comprehensive. It's basically all in one. But what I found interesting is the fact that it doesn't go using Next.js or Create React App or whatever. Instead, it actually uses Snowpack and HTML helper to render the syntax. So effectively, you're just using ES modules in the browser. And then Snowpack just helps you, you know, do the React refresh, like the hot reload and some other micro bundling stuff, I guess. So if you were curious about using React in the browser without really having to rely on complex and big bundlers, or you just want to learn React from scratch, then this is an absolutely article to go and read through. It is really good. Okay. Continuing, we got implement an emulator for fantasy CPU in JavaScript. Just as the title says, this is a tutorial on building your own CPU emulator in JavaScript. It sort of walks you through what the CPU is on a very high level, how does it work, and how do you interpret instructions like this. Really fascinating, really interesting. I think we did similar thing when I was back in university. And of course, I remember struggling immensely the first time I had to build something like this. Like, it took me a few months until I could wrap my head around a task like this. But it is very helpful for you as a programmer, in my opinion. So if that sounds interesting, absolutely do check it out. Like White and Vue. Yeah, it's the Snowpack. I mean, the Snowpack aims to be a bit more generic than White, I think, right? But it's very similar, yeah. Anyway, continuing, we got a really cool write-up from Mr. Devon Govett, who is now part of Adobe, and where they looked at the React Spectrum library that he released from Adobe. Now, the article is titled Building a Button, Part 1, Press Events. And essentially, this is like, the cool thing about this article is that, yes, it just talks about building a button. But how hard do you think it is to build like a proper button with accessibility in mind, with keyboard navigation in mind, with all the features that you actually want to have when you're building an application that a lot of different people will use? Like, not just, you know, internal enterprise app or whatever, but you actually ship it to millions and millions of people. And well, let me tell you, it's not super easy. Again, it's not incredibly hard, but there is a whole ton of different things you have to consider just about one tiny button. So if someone ever tells you how hard could it be to just build a button, well, point him towards this article. And if you are thinking, how hard could it be to build a button, then absolutely do read through this one, because it's, as I said, it's just fascinating how much thought has to go into one simple button if you are shipping it to a different range of users, which is, I guess it's not something that a lot of people work with actually. So unless you're working for a megacorp or something like this, you typically don't actually encounter issues like this, right? But it's just crazy. Hey Mantaputra, welcome to the stream. Accessibility is hard. Yes, indeed, it is crazy hard, and I'm really happy that the modern browsers and the dev tools actually provide hints and guidance on how to make it better, basically, right? I'm also really happy to work in an industry where I don't really I don't really need to care that much about accessibility. Like, I know that, our product is not going to be used by a lot of people who have problems with accessibility, and I only have to account for a certain demographic, basically, which is kind of nice for me. But yeah, this is like, accessibility is crazy, man. Okay, continuing. We got hands-on WebAssembly, try the basics. Another incredibly big article that, just as the title says, introduces you to the WebAssembly. Going from what it is, why do we need it, how exactly does it work, diving into the compilers, and then showing you some examples of what you can actually build and ship with WebAssembly. So I would say that, if you wanted to dive into WebAssembly and was wondering what you can actually do with it and what it is, then this is a really, really good write-up. So again, it's a really big one, really detailed one, but it probably has everything you ever wanted to know about the basics of WebAssembly at least. Hey Gregors, welcome to the stream. All right, and the last thing we got here is this tutorial / explainer, I guess, from Google team titled Content Visibility, the new CSS property that boosts your rendering performance. This is a really cool one. So the content visibility property is still, I believe so it's launching in the Chromium 85, which should be already out. And it's still under review for, I believe, both Firefox and Safari, so it's only usable in Chrome essentially. But the feature itself is freaking awesome. So the idea is that it introduces the new CSS fields titled Content Visibility, right? The idea is that you can assign this property, and essentially it will tell the browser how to render or not render the component. Right? So the idea is that if you assign it to the image, for example, that unless the image is visible, it doesn't matter if it's an image or a div actually, it won't get rendered by the browser. You can also control that programmatically by assigning the content visibility to false, or hidden, I believe is the correct way, and then assigning it to true when you need to actually render something dynamically. And essentially, it gives you more fine-grained control of how the browser renders the web page, right? The cool thing is that it actually constructs the DOM. So the whole structure, as far as I understand, is actually constructed, right? And the only difference is that is it rendered or not? And then there's an example of a website here that you can see the video on the screen. Basically shows the website that takes 232 milliseconds to render the page, which is your typical blog page. And then they do the same page, but with this content visibility set to auto on all of the elements, which means that you only get, the browser basically only renders whatever is visible. Even though it loads all the images and so on and so forth, you can still scroll through the article smoothly and everything will render as you go on, so you don't have to wait for lazy loading or whatever. But because browser only renders what you see, the rendering actually takes just 30 milliseconds initially, which is up to 7 times improvement, which is just insane, by just adding one CSS property, which is crazy. This is really awesome. I would be very curious to see how, if this is shipped to all the browsers, and it looks like it will be at some point, how this will affect stuff like windowing techniques, for example, because this is just perfect for, endless lists or whatever, because you can effectively do some really fancy stuff and make it even closer to native lists, I guess, right? Because this is really, really exciting feature. And if you are curious about that, do check out the article. It's not extremely big, but I think it does a really good job of explaining what it is and how it works. All right. This is it for the getting started section. Now we're coming to the articles and news. We got two things here today. So the first one is, so the article here is A Leap of Faith Committing to Open Source from Henry Zhu, who is one of the maintainers behind the Babel, and I believe he's also contributing to like a dozen of other open source projects. And this is the article, the write-up of how he essentially switched from working full-time at Adobe to becoming a full-time open source maintainer, and how he makes his living by building open source tools, which is honestly terrifying as hell, but the article is absolutely fascinating write-up, and his journey is really, really inspiring. Now, aside from the article, I want to highlight the GitHub README project, which I honestly have not heard about before reading this article. And the project's idea is essentially highlighting the open source maintainers and developers who have, you know, interesting stories, I guess, right? Because there's obviously not all of them are here from the GitHub, but there is a ton of really cool articles here. And another note I want to make is that, you know, okay, those are curated articles. They talk to the people, they interviewed them. It's a really nice write-ups, really professionally written, very interesting to read. But GitHub, please, can you turn GitHub README into a blogging platform so that I can blog about my open source GitHub tools right here without going to Medium, to DevTool, whatever. Just let me do everything on GitHub, please. Like, this looks like such a great blogging platform. Like, look at it's just great. I just want to blog here. But anyway, if you are curious about, you know, how does open source maintainers got to where they are, what it entails to be the open source developer, open source maintainer, absolutely do check out those articles. I would recommend reading all of them. They are really, really cool. There's some very interesting stuff in there. And yeah, it's also terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So yes, that's the thing. And then the second article we got here today is why we decided against GraphQL for local state management. An article from OkCupid. I don't actually think I've seen any other articles from them on technical stuff before, but you know, whatever, that looks quite interesting. And the article itself is a pretty interesting write-up into the I guess that explores the caveats that the local state management through Apollo client specifically basically come with managing local state through Apollo client. So they talk about that, okay, they love GraphQL at OkCupid. They use it quite extensively as the way to communicate between the backend and the front end. And then they wanted to use the Apollo client-side queries for essentially managing the local state, right? I think I already did the video on that. So if you're curious how that works, you can find it in the YouTube channel. But the gist is essentially Apollo allows you to store the queries specifically on the client and persist the data on the client in, you know, in memory or local storage or whatever, the way you configure it essentially. And those way just use the same GraphQL queries to get the locally stored data. It actually works really well. So like we're using that in production, and for our case, it worked perfectly fine. But here's the caveat. So in our case, we just store the whole object. So we have a separate queries and separate mutations for the full local data, right? In case of OkCupid, they actually wanted to extend the server query with additional property that is fetched from the client. So they have this, they essentially, the example they give here is they have this messages view that has the list of messages, and then they have this isOpen flag, right, which is only stored on client because the server doesn't care if you're showing the message or not. And the problem here is that the Apollo client, essentially the way the clients, all the queries really work is through resolvers, right? So you have the resolver that queries the data, then resolves whatever entities you query in here. So for example, since we are querying for the messages array, that would mean there's a messages array resolver that would get all the messages for given user by using some sort of a link, right? Now here's the deal. The thing is that those resolvers, since they're managing the data client side, they have to merge the data, right? So when the server returns something different, they have to figure out which to discard and which to update in cache, right? And if you ever try to write your own cache, if you ever try to work with cache, you know how freaking hard it is. Now, by adding a new property in that cache, it falls upon you as a developer to figure out how to deal with it, right? So if the new messages come from the server, how the hell are they supposed to know how to update this is open property on all of them, right? And this is essentially the problem they had. So they had to write their own specific resolvers for this specific property that would say that, hey, if there is this new data, then we're gonna do that XYZ, update it in this way. Essentially, you have to write your own logic for this, right? Which is additional overhead, and as they're fairly nodes, a lot of time you basically do the exactly same thing when writing any other state management, be it Redux, MobX, or whatever, because you still have to write the business logic, right? Yeah, so this is kind of the gist of it. They reference a lot of actually really good articles that talk about Apollo clients, cache management, cache normalization, and so on and so forth. But yeah, again, this is a very specific problem with Apollo cache and Apollo clients in general, and we did not have that simply because we did not try to merge client-side data with the server-side data, which, as it turns out, you can do, which is, again, super impressive. This is like really huge props to the Apollo guys. But then again, it seems like it takes quite significant effort to do that. So there, again, they close up the article about talking of what kind of solutions they are looking into and what will they do in the end with the local state management. So if you're curious about the GraphQL and local state management, do check this out. I think I've covered like 80% of the article probably. There's obviously a lot more detailed information in here and some other conclusions, but do check it out. It's actually a really good one. All right. That's it for the articles and news. Now we're coming to the tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. We do have quite a few cool things here today, starting with, hey, check this out. Apple finally, Jesus Christ, that took a while. So Safari, starting with a new version, is Safari 14 beta right now. So it's going to be shipped with, I assume, the new version of macOS. Is finally supporting WebExtensions API, the exact same API that you can use in Chrome and Firefox for ages, and that basically allows you to build extension using one API and just use it across all the browsers. Finally. So new Safari will support the same extensions that are built using this API. So in theory, you could basically take any extensions that is built for Chrome, Firefox, and Edge and just use it in Safari, which is, in my book, really great news. So there we go. It took them only, when was the WebExtensions API introduced? Like 3 years ago, if not more. WebExtensions extension API. It's probably like few years now, if not more. Where is extensions API? I remember reading the spec that was like, yeah, okay, obviously it was originated in Chrome, which was like even before it was a spec. But anyway, so it took them quite long enough, but finally you can actually use proper web extension API extensions in the Safari. So there you go. Something to be excited about for the Mac users. I'm really curious to see how that will impact the performance of Safari in terms of the battery life, because they do always tout, like, hey, we have the best battery life on Macs at least. And we'll be very curious to see how that will change with extensions that people will start using. Anyway, next thing we got here is JavaScript generators meet XPath. Really neat approach to querying content using generators and XPath queries. If you never used XPath, it's an incredibly powerful thing that could allow you to, well, get quite a few things out of your web page. And then it seems like, while combining that with generators, you can actually get some really nice helper functions. I personally would not modify the prototypes for that. Like, this is, a big no-no in my book. But as a helper function, that's actually really, really neat. So if you're curious, do check this one out. All right. Next thing we got here is CSSX, and write-up from W3C people that talks about the CSS spec and its evolution, I guess, and, the fact that CSS3 is actually not a thing and never existed, and how it will actually develop into the CSS4, 5, and so on and so forth, which is kind of amusing to read, to be honest, but it's really cool to see sort of this kind of progress here, I guess, and this kind of write-up. So if you're curious about the CSS spec and its future and the way that they are approaching the naming, I guess, do check this one out. It's actually a pretty nice read. It's not very big. Again, this is why it's in tiny things. Anyway, continuing, we got a website titled Will It Course. This is a really nice utility that is essentially there to help you figure out if the request you're going to send is going to hit the course, right? So it's just asks you a bunch of simple questions. So you can just say, okay, we are originating requests from localhost and they're going to be sent to localhost 8080, and then it's going to be a post method, and then we are going to send custom headers, whatever, and then you're going to have stream response, and then you're going to have cookies, and then it's going to be text plain or I guess it's going to be application JSON, for example. And then in the end, it will basically tell you, okay, so the pre-flight is required, and then basically, so it asks you a bunch of questions and explains you what kind of course things you have to set up or consider. Now, if I would have that when I only started working with course, it would save me hours of time because this stuff is not straightforward. So if you're working with course, definitely bookmark this thing and do try it out. It actually helps quite a bit. All right. Continuing, we got this terrifyingly scary big bug in WebShare API in Safari, the current version. So essentially, in the current version of Safari, if you're using WebShare API and you ask the Safari to share the file, it will actually give you access to the contents of the file. So yeah, you can ask for passwords or user history or whatever, and Safari will just give you the contents, which is just bonkers. Hopefully it will get fixed to the next version of Safari, or maybe there's already a hotfix. I know that the Thomas Schreiner here, he's an engineer at Google, and I believe he already filed the bug report to the WebKit and Safari people, so maybe it's already patched, I'm not sure. But yeah, this bug is just scary as hell. Hey Mehatrix, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got pretty cool trivia detail, I guess. So there's the new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, which apparently is a new crisis because it is extremely taxing on hardware to run. And it's a flight simulator, right? So you fly an airplane. So the thing is that the airplanes in the game, to emulate the onboard computer, they are using the WebAssembly. And the explainer essentially why it is done in this way is that because if something goes wrong and the airplane computer crashes, be it the user actions or whatever, because they're using the WebAssembly VM, they can actually just kill it, restart it without crashing the whole game, which is just fascinating. So there you go. And that's a great example of using the WebAssembly and JavaScript. Yeah, I believe that they are using the cockpit instruments are actually implemented using JavaScript. So there you go. Which is, so essentially you are flying a JavaScript VM in that game, which is just mind-blowing when you think about it. Really cool stuff. Hey, sweetheart, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got another minor achievement, I guess. String.prototype.replaceAll is now available in all evergreen browsers, including Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari, which is great. So you can now just start using that. I believe it should be now in Node 14.8 as well, or was it 14.8? I think 14.8 is the latest release, right? So that is really cool to see. And the last little thing we got here is a tweet from Evan Yu. To demonstrate how flexible Vue 3 is, here are some just because I can examples. And this is literally an example that shows you how you can use Vue version 3 with HTML module to render the Vue app just by using ES module in the browser without any bundlers or whatever. And this is just awesome. So the fact that you can do that with Vue is really, really cool. So if you were not interested in Vue before, definitely check out the version 3 now, because this looks really, really exciting. And this is definitely the kind of web that I want to see in the future more. All right, that's it for the tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. Now we are coming to the releases section. We got 4 of them here, and all 4 are relatively major. So the first big one is Electron version 10 that bumps the Chromium version to version 85, V8 to version 8.5, and Node.js to version 12.16. and also deprecates a bunch of stuff. So make sure to, read through the API changes and adjust your code accordingly, I guess, if you're using any of those. I mean, there's not too many, but just keep this in mind. Super exciting to see it progress. So, it's essentially on par with the latest Chrome releases and using the latest LTS version of Node. I would want to have some different version of Electron that uses the latest, just the latest version of Node, because I prefer to live on the edge. It's typically very stable and not, there's not many trade-offs of using Node 14 instead of 12. This typically works better. So yeah, I would prefer to have some sort of an Electron next or whatever that uses that, but I guess you can have everything in life, so there you go. Next release we got here is Firefox version 80. That's, well, the only notable thing is that basically Firefox can now be set as a default PDF viewer, which I guess is fine. There's a bunch of security fixes and some other minor changes. I'm really... like, after all the things that, we actually haven't talked about that, have we? Because we missed a bunch of episodes, we did not talk about all the layoffs and changes happening at Mozilla, and the stuff that's happening there is just heartbreaking, and I'm really, really concerned for the future of Firefox. And there's already been, like, rumors, essentially, of Firefox switching to the Chromium engine, essentially, using the V8 and using Chromium and just ditching all the technology that they've spent years developing, which is, again, just insane. But we'll see how that develops. Anyway, Firefox 80 is here. There's a bunch of known bugs, and make sure to read through that. I believe there already been a bunch of minor patches that essentially fix them, but just, keep that in mind. PDF in all browsers simply suck. Well, it depends what you do with them. Just viewing them works perfectly fine. I typically just use the Edge to view the PDFs if I don't have to do anything with them. If I have to annotate, edit, or whatever, then yeah, usually that's not a very good experience. Anyway, continuing, we got Node.js version 49 that comes with a bunch of minor upgrades to libuv npm, some cherry-picked backports from V8, and V8 enable object print flag enabled by default now. I honestly have no idea what that does. But it's, it's a minor release, nothing super significant here. But again, this is what I'm using pretty much daily, and it works pretty nice. There you go. So no print for you. I typically don't print anything. Like I use digital stuff 98% of the time. So I typically just print or do something physical whenever I need to send it via post or whatever, because Germany. Otherwise, I have an iPad and I just look at the stuff on my iPad. That's like the closest I get to the actual, physical experience, I guess. All right, continuing, we got the D3 version 6.0 that is now adopted ES 2015, including support for iterables and collections. And now also they started splitting the D3.js into separate modules. So they removed D3 events, D3 mouse, touches, client pointer, and pointers, nest, group, rollup, collection, array, Voronoi, and Delaunay. And I guess they're just splitting it into a more fine-grained approach, meaning you can just, import those additional modules and just use them as a plugins instead of dragging the whole thing together, which is personally the approach I really like. So if you're using D3.js, make sure to check this out. It is actually a really solid release. All right. That's it for releases. Now we're coming to the libs and demos. We do have some really cool things here today as well. So I'm not too many of them, but there we go. Starting with tailwind-react. So this is an official tailwind-react set of components that aim to be sort of unstyled. Let me try that again. Unstyled, fully accessible UI components for React that are designed to integrate beautifully with Tailwind CSS. So it's an official set of components from Tailwind guys that are aimed to be completely customizable, but still provide you a nicer way of interacting with Tailwind without, in React without actually doing it yourself. The first and only component for now is transition that allows you to make really nice and smooth animations in React using Tailwind animation classes that actually has a really nice API. So if you're using Tailwind and if you wanted to have some really nice transitions in React, do check it out. It's actually a really, really nice component. Or, you know, at least one component for now is probably going to be a lot more for in the future. I send the link. It's Malav, if you are sending links in YouTube, it tends to eat them out. So either please send it in Discord. Ah, yes, you did send it in Discord. Okay, I'm going to open it and we're going to have a look at the end. Okay, got it. All right, continuing, we got redia. This is, as it says, a web framework that uses React hooks-like approach for declarative and persistent reactivity. So essentially, it's an attempt of making a server, you know, Express-like or whatever, that works using hooks. It's a really weird thing to read, honestly, and I have no idea how that, like... It's just weird. It's interesting. I will give it that, but it just feels really weird to read a server-side code that uses hooks. If you think that this is interesting, or maybe you would like an approach like that, do check it out. I think it would be interesting for sure as a learning material, but as something that you would use in production, I don't know. It just feels too weird, and I personally would prefer the functional approach a lot better than this. But anyway, it's an interesting project nonetheless. Okay, continuing, we got epaper.js, a Node.js library for easily creating an epaper display on Raspberry Pi using HTML and JavaScript. So essentially, it's a lib that allows you to transfer, or I guess render HTML DOM onto epaper display that is compatible with a Raspberry Pi. So, you know, you can just render whatever you want. So if you are dabbling in Raspberry Pi and related components, then do check this one out. It actually looks really damn nice and seems to be extremely easy to use. So there you go. All right. Continuing, we got marksjs, a markup language and rendering engine mostly compatible with Markdown. So someone was not happy with the Markdown and created, I guess, it wouldn't be subset. It wouldn't be a superset. It would actually be, what do you call that? Basically, it's just derivative of Markdown with additional features and a completely different renderer. Not sure, you know, if you would want to use that, but if you are thinking that Markdown is lacking some features and you wanted something that is essentially more powerful and has some additional features, like there's quite a few of them actually here, which some of them look quite interesting. Do check Marks out. Maybe this is exactly what you were looking for. All right, next thing we got here is Juliette, a reactive state management powered by RxJS. So this is a state management library powered by RxJS, as the title says, and it actually has a really nice API. So it's like a very clean, very functional API that seems to be pretty well designed. So if you are into RxJS in general, and if you were looking for a state management library based on it, but we're not happy with the stuff that was out there right now, do check this one out. It actually looks like a really, really damn nice library. Might be very helpful for you if you are working with Angular and UnGRX a lot, because this seems to be sort of offering a replacement that is, I guess, slightly different. Right? But yeah, looks pretty good. All right, continuing, we got svelte-it-will-scale. And this is not really a library, right? It's more of exploratory benchmark. Let's put it this way. This is a very weird way to put it. But anyway, so the gist is that this is a project that compares bundle sizes for Svelte and React, trying to figure out the inflection point. If you never worked with Svelte and never read about it at all, the thing is that basically when Svelte creates a bundle, it adds the runtime that is bundled together with almost every page, every component, right? And at some point, essentially, this bundling creates an inflection point where React becomes more efficient in terms of size than Svelte. And this is exactly sort of the exploration of what is that point in the source code matter. So like, when is the source code big enough to justify using React, and when it is small enough to justify using Svelte to gain this sort of size benefit. And turns out this is about 120 kilobytes of component source code. So if your app is relatively small, smaller than 120 kilobytes of source code, the Svelte is going to be smaller. And then if it's bigger, then actually React is going to be smaller. And significantly smaller, by the way, which is actually really impressive, to be honest. So React is kind of, yeah, it's kind of linear, I guess. I wonder if it's approaching the asymptote or not. But anyway, it's a very interesting dive into it and very interesting to see this kind of exploration. So if you're considering switching from React to Svelte and you are wondering if it's going to help you minimize your sizes, do check it out. Svelte is not only for the low bundle sizes. Absolutely, it is not just about the bundle sizes, but the bundle size is one of the things the Svelte itself talks about a lot, right? And if you are considering switching to Svelte because of the bundle size, then, well, you know, this is sort of thing that might help you figure it out. Let me have a look at the chat. The only thing I need new in JS is native observables. Oh yes, native observables is absolutely a proposal that I would want to see accepted as well. The proposal has been stagnant for ages. I've seen some more discussion on Twitter from, what was his name? I think it was Ben Lesh, who was talking about that he was essentially looking into the, oh, wait a sec, was it Ben Lesh? No, it wasn't. No. Who was it, Matt? Or was it Matthew Podolsky? Sorry, Podwisocki. I think it was him who was talking. Yeah, it was him who was talking. So he's one of the co-creators of their XJS, and he's now doing the thing called IXJS, right? And he was talking about this. So the observable essentially got killed, I guess, or suppressed by the C39 committee because they were not happy with the current state of it. And he's now talking about a sync observable that he's basically implementing in IXJS that might be a better projection and has better interop with promises and, you know, sync await syntax and all that kind of stuff. So there is a chance that this proposal might get revived in some form or other, and we might get observables in JavaScript at some point in the future, which I personally totally agree it would be really awesome to have something like this in the language. And yeah, we'll see how that develops. So it's not quite dead, but not quite alive at the same time. I believe it's still like stage 0 or something. So yeah, we'll see how that develops. From next time, could you please add or share useful GitHub profiles related to JavaScript? What do you mean by useful profiles related to JavaScript? Like there's just like if you just take people who purely do JavaScript, you can count them by fingers. Like there's like this Syndrasaurus, there's that's, I mean, okay, there's the Syndrasaurus, there is, oh god, there's the Mr. Develop-It, I keep forgetting his name. He's now working at Google and mostly does Preact stuff, but he also releases some other minor stuff. But I mean, Git repositories related to JS, this is what I'm doing. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. All of this stuff I'm talking here is related to JavaScript. Anyhow, continuing, we got the next library that is titled KVS. This is a lightweight key value storage library for browser, Node.js, and in memory. So essentially, it's a super lightweight. It's just under 1 kilobyte gzipped key value storage that allows you to, well, use a bunch of other backends to store those data, actually. So including IndexedDB local storage if you're working in browser, Node local storage if you're working in Node.js, obviously in memory, or you can use storage sync to actually sync it to your backend if you want to, which seems to be pretty helpful. So if you wanted sort of a universal key value storage thing, then do check this one out. All right, continuing, we got light date, a blazing fast and lightweight date formatting for Node and browser. So it's 157 bytes utility that essentially allows you to format date in simplish formats, not as powerful obviously as something like datefunds or, you know, any other formatting library. The patterns it supports are quite limited, but it is super tiny and super fast. So if you're looking for something very simple and very fast to format your dates, do check this one out. Again, if you are looking forward to the Temporal proposal, then, you know, it might be better to use a polyfill for now. All right, continuing, we got undici or undici. I'm not exactly sure how to read that. I believe this is an Italian word for 11. Yes, it even says here 11 for Italian. It's a reference to Stranger Things, and it is an HTTP 1.1 client written from scratch for Node.js. And it's actually really performant, really fast, really nice. One of the core creators of it is Mr. Matteo Collina, who is also a creator and maintainer of Fastify and is now part of the Node steering committee, I believe. Yeah, the library is extremely high quality as usual, very fast, very nice. The API is quite damn convenient, and it is also hosted under Node.js/undici, so I'm not sure what the intentions here are. Probably to put it into the Node core later on, maybe. It's just a guess here. Not exactly sure, but the lib itself is actually quite damn nice. So if that sounds interesting, do check it out. All right. Next thing we got here is dnjs, DOM Notation JS, a pure subset of JavaScript that wants to replace overly limiting configuration languages and multi-string-based HTML, XML templating. So this seems to be an attempt of creating JavaScript-based XML kind of language for configurations, question mark. It's like, I guess it's fine. Like, I don't know. Like, why would you need a subset of JavaScript if you can just use JavaScript if you need the complex configurations, right? So this is kind of my line of thought. But I'm looking at it as a JavaScript developer, right? So the gist of dnjs is that you can actually use it in other languages as well. So it provides you packages for, I believe there was like a Python package and something else. Yeah, there's a Python. There is Python and JS for now. But anyway, I guess, you know, it makes sense for Python. But if you are using JS, you can just use JavaScript file. But yeah, anyway, if you are working with configs and if you wanted some portable config format that is flexible enough to be used in Python and JavaScript, then check dnjs out. Maybe this is your thing. All right, next thing we got here is shift-ctrl-f, the browser extension that allows you to query the current page using natural language. I thought it was a really neat project, so I'm not sure how good it is or how useful it will be, but it is definitely a really good learning project. So what it does is it basically takes all the text on the page, throws it into the mobile BERT model using TensorFlow.js, and then allows you to ask natural language questions about that text, which, you know, it probably works decent enough. I think it's a really cool project in terms of, again, learning how stuff like mobile BERT and TensorFlow.js allow you to interact with the text. So if you're interested in natural language processing and natural language queries, do check this one out. It's actually really nice. Again, maybe even try using it. Maybe it will save you some time if you work with a lot of text in some knowledge bases that you have no control over, no native search functionality. So this might be actually pretty damn cool. Right, continuing, we got BxJS, easy to implement 3D typography for the web. As you can see here, I'm moving my mouse and it dynamically moved this text. It is just a 4 kilobyte of size, minified MIT licensed library that essentially allows you to turn pretty much anything into 3D text just by adding some data properties to span. You can turn the letters or anything else into 3D, and yes, you can still interact them as if it was just a simple text. Also works on images, logos, and whatever else. Actually a really, really neat project. So if you are curious, do check it out. The author also accepts tips, so do that if you are going to use that. Seems like a, yeah, really damn nice library. Again, it is MIT licensed and open source. You can actually find the source code on GitHub if you are curious. All right, continuing, we got react-native-keycloak, a component for working with Keycloak from React Native. If you ever tried working with Keycloak, you know how much of a pain in the ass that is. And honestly, having a component that does it for you is really nice. So if you're working with React Native and you want it, or you need to integrate with Keycloak, do check it out. This seems to be a really nice project. Right, next thing we got here is arwes, a futuristic sci-fi and cyberpunk graphical user interface framework for web applications. Now this one is a really nice looking. So there's the arwes.dev website that looks absolutely fancy. Like this feels like almost like a video game UI, to be honest. And it allows you, like, there's themes, there's sounds, there's different containers, there's different features that support animations, block quotes, lists, whatever you can imagine. It's probably all here. So if you ever wanted to make a very fancy UI, yeah, do check this out. Actually, really, really damn impressive. So there you go. Right, that is it for the list I've had for today. As usual, you can find all the links mentioned on the GitHub or on bxjs.dev once the website updates. You can join our Discord and discuss any of that. If you have any questions or suggestions right now, feel free to throw them into the chat. I will be more than happy to answer any questions you have or highlight the links that you want to share. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, do not throw links in there. You can join our Discord and throw links there, or just throw them into the Twitch chat, which should work perfectly fine. And now, yes, I'll just have a look at the link that was shared by Malav, I think. No, it wasn't Malav. Who did share? Oh, yes, I think, yeah, it was Malav. Okay. You can have a look at that link after that. Where are you getting the stuff from? I am getting my news from Twitter, from Reddit, and from my RSS subscription. So there's like 3 major websites, and from people who shared them in the Discord chat. There's basically the 4 core sources, and that's about it. Exclusive website, 47 people waiting to get in. Play sounds. Okay, then. Last entry to the website was Saturday, August 29, 1 p.m. Right, and it plays elevator music. Okay, sure. Tim, did you notice a slowness in VS Code when using it with VSL? Git is a bit slow to cache the file changes. I mean, it does have certain delay for me sometimes. So I think basically when I overload the VSL with stuff, it does have some degree of slowdown, but not too much. So I don't think it's critical. Like, I do notice sometimes, especially when I compile stuff or do some, intensive database migrations or whatever, it definitely slows down the VS Code. But other than that, no, it doesn't really, like, in my normal coding workflow, it's not really that noticeable. Only once with patient can get inside. I'm waiting on a 4th position. Why is this website a thing? Sometimes I have to click on refresh to detect changes. I mean, I might not be noticing the whole, like, Git integrations thing because I'm not using Git integration with VS Code that much. So I typically just use CLI. It might be just something to do with the Git itself. But, I'm not using Git with VS Code too much. So maybe that's the reason why I don't notice it. But for me, it's usually working perfectly fine. But then again, this is my gaming machine that has a pretty beefy CPU and 32 gigs of RAM, so that might also be the reason why it doesn't slow down that much for me. I probably should also tweak the VSL. Have you tried tweaking the VSL config? Because it might be just that you're not allocating enough RAM or CPU to it, so it just slows down to the crawl. Try doing that, maybe that will help it. Okay, I am not willing to wait for 26 people to just look at the website, whatever's on there. I'm not patient enough. Same as well, I have monsters too, but still happens, not a big deal. Try tweaking the config, yeah, because the config is really flexible, actually. I was surprised when I basically had a look at what you can tweak with it, and there is so many things, it's just mind-blowing. I mean, it is a VM after all, so there's like a ton of things you can tweak, so just try allocating more RAM and more CPU resources to it, prioritize it a bit more, and see if that helps. Might as well solve everything for you. Right. Okay. Any more questions, suggestions, or what is wrong with me today? Or other things you guys want to ask or share? If not, we can just wrap it up here for today. Again, as I said, you can find all the mentioned links on the GitHub. Link should be in a description or in Twitch channel description. If you want to follow all the links that I gather over the week, there is a Telegram channel that you can just subscribe to and see all the unfiltered links. Some of the links that I collect over the week don't really make it into podcast because I don't think they are basically good enough. And yeah, I think that's basically it from my side. All right, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes Again, you can go to bxjs.dev to find all the links that you can you might want to have, including the Discord, GitHub, Reddit. But should kill Reddit and Facebook. Really, I don't never update that stuff. But yeah. Okay, doesn't seem like we have any more questions or suggestions. So thank you guys very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. As usual, there is gonna be dev stream on Wednesday. We're gonna continue building GraphQL framework that we started on last Wednesday. If you're curious, there is a VOD on YouTube. And that's basically it from my side. Do you know if Google forbids to publish extension related to YouTube? No, I don't think they specifically forbid anything unless you violate the terms of service, like, you know, allowing downloads and stuff like this. If you're just providing additional features, it should be perfectly fine. Tosom, thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support, guys. All right, that's going to be it from my side. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for your continued support. If you have any more questions or suggestions, just join Discord and poke me there. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Have an awesome rest of the weekend or rest of the week if you're watching the VOD of this. And I'll see you on Wednesday. Bye.